And I was trying to drink more water to kind of drink away the headache. But the headache just keeps on building up and it is getting a bit annoying, irritating, and a little bit unbearable.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 150 of the Strokecast. It's kind of mind-boggling to think that I'm all the way up at 150 now, but really, I'm just getting started with the show. Anyway, this week's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova, and by the fine folks at Like Minded. To find out if Like Minded can help you live your best post-stroke life, visit strokecast.com/Like Minded. And if you missed those links, just head on over to strokecast.com and click on them on the sidebar. I met Jasmine Loh last year through Clubhouse. Jazz had been working as a quality assurance manager in Singapore, making sure that computer chip testing was accurate in the expensive and precise and detailed world of semiconductor manufacturing. Now, one day, Jazz, in her late 30s, was having lunch with a colleague at work when suddenly she had her hemorrhagic stroke due to ruptured aneurysms. The next year, Jazz left her engineering gig. She opted to pursue the freelance life, basically becoming her own digital web and marketing agency. Her understated nature, her compassion for others, and really her drive to solve problems really comes through in her story. And that's the story we're sharing today. So now, let's go ahead and meet Jasmine Loh. So Jazz, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you, Bill. It's my honor to be on your show.
I think it's great that we're able to connect like this because a year ago, we hadn't connected because Clubhouse hadn't really been a thing yet. And so I definitely want to talk about Clubhouse a little bit later because that's been a great platform for connecting with folks who I already knew in the community and for meeting a whole bunch of new people in the community too.
Indeed. It's really thanks to this app that I found this extension of the brain injury community, and I never knew how much I needed these guys actually.
You know, way back in the before times when we would be able to have in-person meetings, one of the things that was always just super powerful about going to a support meeting was when somebody new would come in and you'd get to say to them, look, you know what? We get it. It's okay. If you're going to stumble with your word finding, if you're going to stumble around the room, that's okay. You're around a group of people who get it. And oftentimes, it's the first time a newer brain injury survivor has been around a group of people with a similar experience. And it's just so powerful to suddenly be a part of that community.
To be honest, my journey, when I started, I had my stroke back then, was in 2016 February. In fact, it was just 2 days before Valentine's Day when I had my stroke. So I totally get what you say, because even though I had my stroke back then, my recovery was without this kind of support community. So it is a real struggle for me to cope with everything and so forth.
Right. Yeah, the whole social media support world wasn't really a part of it in the same way, you know, just a few years ago. So, I mean, leading up to that February 12th, 2016, though, I mean, what was your life like in that time frame?
So I was still working in my corporate job. I was actually in semicon manufacturing. So I was an engineer there. It was my first job after college, and I kind of worked and studied, pursuing my uni degree. So I was in that job, although I was somewhat young, but I was in that job for a good 19 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was in corporate life for 19 years. Being an engineer, I was pretty quick thinking, I would say, and I can multitask very proficiently. In fact, my last position as a systems automation engineer, I was doing data analysis and certification of data. And the work level is quite hectic, as in I'm on 24/7 standby because, in the manufacturing line, it never sleeps. Okay, it sounds like it sounds like a Citibank ad, but not. It's not, it's really it. We don't stop. It's a 24/7 manufacturing plant. So although I work the normal office hours, but we do have shift workers in order to support the non-stop production. I was doing testing of semicon products, so the testers don't stop. In that sense, I might have been a little bit kind of like neglecting the mental health aspect because of my job requirement. I probably didn't realize that I was pushing myself a little bit more than necessary because in terms of like health wise, I wasn't a gym freak, I wasn't a health nut, but I do my exercises, I do trekking. In fact, I was supposed to do my third year climb up Mount Kinabalu, Kota Kinabalu, which is one of the highest peak in Sabah. That was supposed to be my third year consecutive scaling up that mountain. So I was exercising and I do yoga and things like that, but I might have neglected the mental stress part, probably the job aspects as well. So if something crops up, usually the technicians are the first responders. If they can't solve it, they'll bring up to the next level, which is my level. And if I get, I have to get it resolved. If not, the next day when I get back to the office, it will be a bit of firefighting, a bit of like questions to answers. If I can't get it done, my boss will be the next in line to be activated. So you can imagine that kind of level of work.
I've been in the tech space as well on the marketing side since 1995. So my job is to go ahead and make the statements that make the engineers go, "Oh, please don't say that." But
oh, okay.
But what's interesting is you talk about your first job out of uni, and you were there for 19 years.
Actually, it was more like the first job out of Polytechnic. So I joined them when I was like 19 years old, 20 years old, around that kind of age. It's like fresh out of what would you probably call high school, something like that, or tertiary education. Yeah. So I actually did my university degree part-time while I was working.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, that alone is a lot too there. But then, is it pretty common or is it unusual in Singapore then to spend almost 20 years at the same company in the tech space?
Maybe in my era, oh my gosh, I'm making myself sound like a dinosaur. Okay, but maybe in people of my generation, probably people in my generation, I could say half of them might stay long, half of them would not. For me, I was in the same company for that period of time, but I had multiple job roles.
Right. Especially in the tech space, you're always continually evolving what you can do, the skills you have, and how you can apply them to the new environment, because companies in this space are constantly facing a new environment. And if we look back at just what had happened, from in that 20-year span, I mean, when you started there, about the same time I started in the tech space, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth weren't a thing. Mobile phones were only a very small part of what people used, and the entire world has transformed from technology in that time. And within the same company, you've been able to adapt through the different changes, and that's pretty powerful.
I definitely have seen several cycles of that. Yes, I think I joined the workforce just 2 years after you. I guess I started work in 97.
Yeah.
Then the stroke 2016. Yeah. Then the stroke was 2015. Oh gosh, I got my dates mixed up again. I think the stroke was 2015, but I quit my job in 2016. Yeah. That was when I decided, okay, enough is enough. After the stroke and things like that, I just have to make a different decision.
Right. So, what happened on that February 12th, 2015?
On that day, it was probably lunchtime. I went out with a colleague for lunch, and while we were eating at the what we call the coffee shop, which is quite similar to like it's like a eating place, like a food center.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, it sounds like a food court. And what I have heard is that Singapore has amazing food courts.
Yes, it's something like a food court, but usually food court are like air conditioned and a bit more upscale. So a coffee shop is usually like open air, maybe similar to like a alfresco dining, except without the bells and whistles. Yeah. I was having lunch with my colleague. I was still eating my ordered fried rice, and I ordered coffee. And I think that was the period whereby there was the first sign of stroke, because my friend was talking, but suddenly I had a whiteout moment, as in everything around me just became white, like white blinding light. But I didn't pass out or anything. And then slowly after, I'm not too sure, maybe a few seconds or so, the whiteness just subsided, and I'm kind of like faded away, and the image of the whole coffee shop returned back into my visual field. So the first thing I did was, when my coffee came, I immediately drank it. So I could taste the coffee bitterness. I could feel it's very hot, almost like scalding my tongue. So I was thinking, okay, I'm having sensations. So I don't think it's anything bad. At least that was my own check. But I think I kind of like stoned for a few, or like kind of like blanked out for a few moments, because apparently my friend was talking and I wasn't responding. So I guess that was during the whiteout moment. So, but she thought that probably maybe I was having a bad day at the office, so she just didn't really comment. So after lunch, my friend was on leave, so she went off, went to settle her errands, while I made my way back to work, back to office. During that time, I started to feel, I felt a headache building up, like, that dull pain at the back of the head that builds up, and you thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is going to be a very, very bad headache that's coming up. So I thought, I kind of like associated that with, again, the heat or lack of water, because, sometimes when you don't drink enough water, you're dehydrated, you kind of get a headache as well. So I made my way back to the office, the cool air-conditioned environment, and I was trying to drink more water to kind of like drink away the headache. But the headache just keeps on building up, and it is getting a bit like annoying, irritating, and a little bit unbearable. But I kind of like just I kind of just like put up with it. And while I was still like trying to calm myself down from the headache and things like that, my boss came over and asked for me and my supervisor to attend a meeting. So I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Because I know that meeting that probably wouldn't be an easy one. So, yeah. So because, usually if they go for the meeting, maybe my supervisor would just go. They probably wouldn't need me around. But if they need me around, so I think I'm there to substantiate some information. So I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I think that won't be an easy meeting. I went over to the meeting. I think in that room, most of them were managerial level and above. I was the only engineer there. So I was like, although it might be a bit tense and stuff like that, but I just couldn't concentrate on the meeting. The headache was getting worse and worse, until to the point whereby I really cannot concentrate on what they were talking. I just raised my hand to the highest level boss in the meeting room. I just said that, I'm so sorry, I don't think I'm feeling well. And the moment I said that, I immediately puked, as in like started to throw up. Yeah, so the rest of them, they were shocked. They quickly just, gave me a waste paper basket, and I was hugging it and just puking my whole lunch and everything all out. Mm-hmm. So I just kept on throwing out. I started to kind of like losing sensation, losing track of time, and losing, kind of like I can't focus on what's going on. I don't even know when. I was just throwing up until to the point whereby there's nothing throwing, but yet I was retching. My colleagues then in the room, including my bosses and all of that, they were all guys. So they at first they were thinking, could she be pregnant? So they thought, they kind of like, I was just throwing out and the meeting was going on as per normal. Just imagine that scene. Or at least it looked to, at least for me, that was what I perceived. Maybe to their point of view, it wasn't. But that was what I perceived at that moment, because I still could hear the indistinct conversation and discussions going on in the background while I was still throwing up. But I just couldn't follow. I don't even know when, but they passed me an empty dustbin. To continue throwing out. I think I'm not too sure, is it filled out or I mean, is it filled up or what? But they passed me an empty. I didn't even know the bin that I was hugging was changed. So that was when I realized that something is not right. I am losing track of things that's happening around, and I realized that I started to can't feel my feet. You know, that kind of like loss of sensation. So I know something was not right. So at that point of time, while they were still having the meeting, I actually told my boss, could you call my husband? Because I felt something was really off already, but I couldn't put my hand to it. So my boss tried to call my husband and tried to call the other colleague that went with me for lunch to see if anything I ate that could have caused such a nasty reaction or something like that. That is, you know, my boss was actually on the verge of like sending me home, you know, to rest. But luckily, my husband called in time, and when my boss described what happened, my husband told my boss, just send her to the hospital, because my husband knows that my pain threshold is very high. For me to react in such a way, something's not right. They asked me if I can walk. At that point of time, I told them I can't walk because I can't even feel my feet. Not to mention, I can't even lift my feet. So I was like losing sensation from waist down. And I was really losing track of time. At that point, I think it started to speed up quite a lot, as in all these loss of senses.
Well, you know, what's amazing, there's a lot of things that are just amazing about this story. For one thing, I think this is fascinating as you describe it, as you're just gradually becoming, your mind is just gradually becoming less and less connected to your body and to the world around you.
Exactly. I was like fading in and out, I was like kind of like drifting in and out of consciousness. Start to, you know, instead of that little few seconds of lost consciousness becomes longer lost consciousness in between. Like a few seconds became more seconds to the point of like minutes. So it's like I wrote a book, a little ebook that I put it for free download on my website, Blessings Really. And actually this kind of like details what I experienced. So, but in summary, it's like I started to lose consciousness in between, until to the point it's like I can hear my colleagues talking, then I kind of like blank out. The next moment, I can feel someone else talking to me. Like then I realized that it could be the paramedics because I could see it's a uniform, and then I start to blank out again. And then the next one is like when I like kind of like opened my eyes, I was like being wheeled out because I could see the office, you know, lights above me moving. So I know I was being wheeled out of the office, probably on those movable stretcher beds or those kind of stuff. So I was being wheeled out, and I could see some of my, you know, colleagues' faces. Then after I lost consciousness for another few seconds, and then when I come back again, it was in the lift because I could hear the elevator bells, you know, going ding, ding, ding at the floors. Then I kind of blank out again. The next moment, I see the back of an open ambulance, and I blank out again. Yeah, so it kind of like all the way until I was in the ambulance, and the person was asking me questions. I know the answer. I was nodding, but that was the point of time where I couldn't speak already.
Right. Well, it's amazing what those flashes that come through. I have just this I have a pretty good memory of my experience, but one of the things that really strikes me is I have just this memory of laying on the stretcher in the ambulance, looking out the back window while we're on the way to the hospital, and I'm just concentrating on the streetcar tracks leaving, laying in the middle of the pavement behind us as I try to figure out sort of now what street are we on as we're heading down this path. The other thing that's really kind of amazing about your story is that this meeting kept going to the point where you're throwing up in a bucket. And then at some point, the meeting is still going, and their choice, their decision is not, maybe we should get Jazz out of this meeting, or maybe we should stop the meeting. Their decision they make is, well, somebody get her another bucket.
But maybe according to their perspective, they were checking in on me. But maybe during those times they were checking in on me, or the times I blanked out, I'm not too sure.
Well, hey, having a stroke was not part of that meeting agenda. So you got to stick
Definitely.
with the agenda, get through your action items, then come back to the added stuff that came on.
Definitely. And actually, during this experience, it also highlights to me how uneducated people are towards symptoms of stroke. Nobody noticed that throwing up is actually a symptom of stroke.
I hear that from a lot of survivors who've had throwing up as part of their stroke. But I think we especially find that as more common with women who are experiencing a stroke.
Oh, that is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, nausea and throwing up, I believe, come up more often as a symptom that women experience. We're starting to hear more and more about some of the additional symptoms that women are more likely to display while having a stroke than men are. Now, one of the things you mentioned, this was caused by an aneurysm. Did you already know before your stroke that you had an aneurysm?
I wasn't aware. Even in a normal comprehensive health check, nobody will do a CT scan to find that.
Right. You're not looking for you're not getting an MRI unless you have a reason to get an MRI.
Exactly. You even if you get a CT scan, it may or may not spot an aneurysm. It depends on the size of it as well. So some people who actually know that they have a prior aneurysm, I happen to know someone who actually reached out to me a few years back on Facebook to ask me more about my stroke. But at that point of time, I'm not sure why I missed her message totally. But this year, I actually happened to see her message and I connected back with her. And she has aneurysms as well, but she hasn't had her stroke. Her aneurysms are still intact and she's under monitoring now. So I asked her, how did she find out about it? So it seems like she had some ENT problems. So they were doing the scans on her face, that means her ENT, the ear, nose, throat area. During those scans, they spotted the aneurysm.
Wow.
So it's like if you don't have such requirements, most people who have aneurysms would really go undetected. It's really just a time bomb, waiting for something to trigger, or we will never know what might trigger it even to bleed.
And a lot of people don't even know what an aneurysm is. They think an aneurysm is when it bursts in the brain, and they confuse a hemorrhagic stroke with an aneurysm. Whereas thousands of people, millions of people around the world have aneurysms in their head, which are just weak spots in blood vessels, like bubbles in the side of a blood vessel, that you could go your entire life and nothing will ever go wrong with that.
Exactly. Yes. And actually for this aneurysms, that's why a lot of people who collapse suddenly, it's either a cardiac arrest or I would think most likely it's an aneurysm rupture, but most people wouldn't know the actual cause of it. Especially if, you collapse suddenly. Who would go and do an autopsy to see if it's brain bleed? For that matter.
Right. So you've had this aneurysm rupture at lunchtime. That was probably...
I suspect the bleeding occurred at that time. That's why I had the whiteout condition, that scene that I saw. Yeah.
Right. And then you have blood pouring into your brain and depriving other parts of your brain of blood, while you've got just now this extra mass taking up space and squeezing against other things in your brain as you're having this headache, as you're getting sick, and as you're getting worse and worse in this meeting. So they get you to the hospital. And then what was the treatment they did?
So what they had to do that night immediately was to drain off the bleeding. So I actually had 3 by right after they did the scans and stuff like that. So I actually had 3 surgeries to do. They found out that mine was an aneurysm that ruptured. So the first thing they have to do is, of course, to control the bleeding or make sure to drain off the excessive blood. If not, it will just build up the pressure in the head. So that is the first surgery they have to do. They actually drilled several holes, put in the I'm not too sure. Is it a shunt or stents to drain off the blood? So they have to.
I think it's a shunt that drains it. I think it's a stent that they use to keep things open.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it should be the shunt. Something like a tube or a straw kind of thing. So I actually had 3 of them drilled in, and to drain off the blood. So the second, I kind of cannot remember the sequence of the surgery, but one of the surgery is supposed to be if my body is or my brain is not able to so-called like drain off the blood in the head. The next surgery would be actually to internalize a shunt also or a tube to drain it off internally into, like maybe into the stomach or intestine to drain it off. That means they have to internalize the tube. But fortunately for me, after they drain off adequately the blood, I'm able to drain off on its own. So I skip that surgery. Then the next surgery that I have to do is to arrest the bleeding aneurysm. And my case was my aneurysm. Usually for aneurysm, they have 2 ways. One of them is, I think they call it endovascular coiling, or is it angioplasty? I can't remember the term, but it's whereby they insert a fine metal wire through one of the large veins in your leg or groin up into the head and go towards the aneurysm. The balloon part, example for my case is two little balloons, and kind of like clot it with the metal coil. I mean, with the metal to form a clot there.
Okay.
But I can't do that. I actually had a craniotomy because I had 2 aneurysms that ruptured, and both aneurysms was on the same blood vessel.
Yeah.
So it was actually quite a massive bleeding. And so I had to have a craniotomy, and I now have permanently 2 titanium clips in my brain that goes with me wherever I go.
Wow. And for those who don't know, a craniotomy, that's where they actually take out part of your skull.
Yeah. So it's like what we would call in layman terms the open brain surgery.
Right. So then they clipped the aneurysms, and did they put the skull right back in, or were you, or did they have that out for a while?
They put my skull in, but I had indentations and some fragments that's missing. So I mean, after it healed over, I actually had parts of my head, on my skull that it is recessed in, and when I tried to like push it in, I couldn't feel the bone. So I don't want to. I mean, obviously, I don't want to continue to push it in, but I believe those are little bone fragments that are missing, or chipped. Certain parts that are chipped. I'm not too sure why. Could it be during the clamping or whatever? This I never really asked the doctor, but that brain surgery, that craniotomy, I think had about 50 stitches all around the head, across one of the temple. And they also had to, our jugular vein, they also had to make an incision there to control the blood flow if necessary during the operation. So yeah, I look pretty bad as when just after the surgery, because I have a long scar all the way from one side of my head all the way down to my neck.
Wow. Yeah, you've posted some photos on social, and it's pretty impressive and pretty amazing to see those stitches. So then, how long were you hospitalized?
I was in the ICU for the intensive care unit for a week, and the other one, they called it the high dependency ward, for another week. And then I was in the general ward for another week. So I was hospitalized for about 3 weeks. Okay, because in the hospital when I was in the general ward, I did have the physiotherapists or the rehab people to access me, and they find that I don't need rehabilitation. Just based on my recovery rate, according to one of the neurosurgeons, is like I akin to surviving a nuclear bomb. So I was kind of like a very good recovery, like what they call the top 10% recovery rate that is able to return to workforce, despite whatever other after effects that we all know and very clear of what we have to deal with. But to their point of view, I'm good to go.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's amazing. 2 ruptured aneurysms, multiple brain surgeries, and in 3 weeks they're like, "Yep, you're good to go."
Yeah, I skipped the third one. So yeah, 2 brain surgeries. Yes, one for the shunt, the other one for the clipping.
At that point, I mean, what were your deficits like? What were the impacts of the stroke on you when you left?
For me, mainly was lack of stamina. Very, very bad. It's like what I could do previously. I was doing like trekking and climbing mountains, although it was quite challenging, but I could do it. After the stroke, you asked me climb a flight of stairs, and it would be like akin to climbing the mountain. So my stamina was very bad. My speech slurred a little bit. I kind of like minced my words a little bit more than usual. But these were considered very minor. Considering what I went through, I believe I was really very blessed already.
Do you have a favorite memory from your time in the hospital?
I was definitely very feisty, but I think they would rather that feisty than listless. So I was pretty feisty.
Sure.
I remember. I mean, when I was on the leg of recovery, in the beginning, obviously, I can't fight. I mean, in the beginning, I was really pretty much like a dead fish.
Sure.
In terms of response, even to a point whereby they thought that I might be part paralyzed because one part of my body was not responding as well. And I had obviously the common fevers, after surgeries, you have this kind of like minor infections and fever build up. It could be low grade fever, but I was like contending high fever, things like that. But once all those cleared and I was on the road of recovery, I started to be very feisty, very sassy. I didn't realize that because usually I'm a little bit more in check, but I guess that is my true nature showing. I don't know. So I also had a lot of dreams during the whole ordeal.
Interesting.
Yeah, the dreams part is really very interesting. But I guess that is probably how the brain is piecing out the various information that that it gets from all the different sensors. Brain is in trauma at that point of time, so it can't process it properly. So I feel that maybe that's the reason why the dreams appear that way. And the dreams is very interesting because it evolves as well as I recover. The dreams were things like I saw myself as a character, like like a game character, those little cute 2D characters with a big head and a small body in a medieval town fighting a red dragon.
Oh,
so I had to walk around, navigate the place, pick up health bombs and weapons and stuff like that and fight the red dragon. So I have no idea what does all this symbolically means, to be very honest. But I was fighting this red dragon.
I think that's very interesting how the brain, when it's in trauma and is just scrambling and just trying to figure out how to process stuff, it goes back to just what other tools do I have to help me make sense of this? And that whole idea of fighting a red dragon while you've got blood pouring into your brain or having recovering from having blood pouring into your brain. I think that is just fascinating, the metaphors that the brain itself comes up with to try and make sense of its new environment.
And the interesting thing about this red dragon, although I was fighting it, but it was a compassionate dragon. So, like in a game whereby you can see your health stats and your weapon stats and things like that. So same thing. So I guess all those stats that I see in the game, like from probably other monitoring devices beeping around. So that is what I perceive lah. This red dragon, when I'm fighting it and I'm losing it, I'm being pinned by it, and my stats are going down, the red dragon will actually loosen its grip to let me, kind of like recover a little bit before it fights me again. Yeah, so as I could see all my health meter beeping in front of me and things like that in the game, as well as I could see the whole stats.
It's all about fair play.
Interesting dragon, yeah. So this was the interesting part about the fighting the dragon. The days go on. The dragon starts to kind of like morph into other dreams. I start to have other dreams of something a bit more realistic. As in, like, I suddenly dream that I'm in Japan. I find myself walking the streets of Tokyo. I have no idea how that happened, but maybe people visited me and they talked about something. So probably certain things that, picked up and I find myself in that scene. And then if not, then I would be like having I think a drag car race. And one of my competitors was actually one of the nurses. I could remember the face. Yeah. So this is how the things start to kind of like form in the dreams, and it becomes more and more real like, until to the point where I start to really wake up conscious of consciousness. Of course, I mean, along the way when I was having these dreams, I still have consciousness and seeing people around me and things like that, but not always. Most of the time, I'm heavily sedated and stuff like that.
Consciousness is not so much of an on or off thing. It's not that you're conscious or you're unconscious. It's such a spectrum in terms of how the brain is connecting with the real world versus how it's connecting with itself versus how awake and aware you are and all of that stuff. So there's so many different combinations of how that can come into play.
Exactly. And if you are into the aspects of out-of-body experience, I actually had 2 episodes which other people told me that was an out-of-body experience and you nearly crossed into the realm of the never return. So I was like, oh, that's very interesting. So in between all these changes, there was a scene that was one of the scenes was I was in this place, very, very peaceful. And the place was just white, as in like white sands. And the sand just roll on to the furthest that I can ever see. And it's very, very peaceful. The feeling is almost addictive, as if it's like you just want to stay there. And then another time I have a white sandy place scene also. But this time around, there were people around me, so-called people. But I don't know them. And they are like in their own world, everyone just minding their own business, just lazing and lounging on the sand or just standing around and things like that. Then I was like, I'm not too sure why am I in this white sandy place, but now there are people around. So I actually asked out aloud, where am I? Why am I here? Somewhere around, like further down the distance, like suddenly there was a voice. And there was a person, quite big and muscular kind of person, as if like you would look at him and you think that he's probably like a gladiator type of physique or a guard or a soldier. There's this person standing on this mound of sand, and he said to me in a booming voice, "This place is for members only." I was like, I creeped out. Then I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to be here. And the scene changed immediately. So these were 2 very unique dreams as well that I had. And when I was relating this to some other people, they told me that I'm not sure, maybe in their religion, they're saying that those places usually, if you say you'll stay, you will not come back to the human realm. I was like, okay. So that means I actually so-called crossed over twice. They told me that.
There's so much stuff out there within our heads and within the broader world. And I mean, you're having these experiences, these dreams, and going through this whole thing and fighting dragons and all of this stuff. And at the same time, your background for the past couple of decades is as an engineer, very
logical,
very logical, very precise. I mean, how did your background as an engineer then inform or help your stroke recovery or harm it?
I'm not too sure if it harmed it or helped it, but because when I returned back to work, whatever that I used to do, I can't do. It kind of like gave me that knock onto, hey, as much as the hospitals think that you have recovered, you are not. As in, like, I was still grappling with a lot of things. I was having the headaches. Or maybe I just give you a brief scenario. Previously, when I was doing data analysis and helping to solve production issues and stuff like that, I would be having 2 computer screens in front of me and my laptop. I would be doing data analysis while multitasking. Someone or my colleague could be just coming by my table and sitting beside me and telling me of a problem, like giving me a particular lot number to check out what's wrong with it. I would be checking out on that particular lot while I was still doing data analysis. Halfway, I can just pause it there. Now I'll be helping my colleague to check out what went wrong and advising them what to do. And then my phone would be ringing. I'll be picking it up, and it could be a call from production line asking me the same thing to check on something, and I could just switch. So I can switch so-called multitask very effectively, but we all know it's actually single tasking super effectively. After the stroke, I can't do any of this at all. Everything has to be single task.
I can absolutely relate to that too. It's, I used to do a lot more task switching. And now if I'm going to do that, I have to pause and consciously sort of realign all of my tasks in the queue in my head to then be able to start putting them together, or I'm just going to forget something.
Yeah, correct. So after that, we all came up with our own ways to kind of like cope and manage, like reminders, task lists, this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Knowing a lot, were you able to apply what you knew about data analysis to your recovery or to going through this experience in the hospital?
So I remember I was feeling a bit ticklish and uncomfortable. So I pulled out the tube that was supposedly the feeding tube. Fortunately, and not nothing serious.
Right.
So I pulled out the tube from my nose because a feeding tube goes in through there. So I was pulling it out and it felt good because it was ticklish. I'm not too sure. It felt like a fish bone coming out from the esophagus part. So it felt nice. I was pulling out the tube. Comfort. And then suddenly I heard a shriek or a scream in the background. Apparently it was one of the nurses who saw me doing that, and that was actually the point where I really woke up into full consciousness. She said, "No, you can't do that. What are you doing?" And then suddenly I felt a pair of hands. I was happily removing it because it felt so comfortable.
Right.
And he slightly pressed down onto me and tried to insert the tube back. And I think she called another nurse to come, or maybe another nurse saw what was happening, so she came in to help. So I was being pinned down, and I was like, "Why are you doing this?" So she inserted back the tube in, but it didn't go in the right way, maybe due to like my struggling and things like that, or due to the panic. So it came out from my mouth instead. It's a bit comical, yeah. But and then they said, "No, wrong way." Then they pulled it out again, inserted in again, and obviously I was very uncomfortable and super pissed. And that was when I actually woke up fully and I roared at them. I was like, "WTF are you doing?" And then I just realized that I shouldn't have said that, because it suddenly came back to me that, hey, you're not supposed to say that. You must be a bit more civil, a bit more polite. Then I kind of like, I was coughing and gagging from that whole tube insertion thing, and then when I calm myself down, I looked at the nurses and said, "Why you do that?" Then the nurses told me that you are not supposed to be off the feeding tube. The doctors haven't given any instruction on that. Then my work brain came in. I told them straight, "Why don't you question the doctor? Not you are supposed if you don't think that that's right, you should question them." Then I actually stopped and I laughed at myself, because that is usually what I tell the technicians. Not all engineers are correct. If they give you a weird order, you got to question the engineer. So that was that work moment that came in without me realizing. But after that thing, I was fully awake and fully conscious. And I think from that incident that follows on, my recovery really sped up. And I think 1 or 2 days later, I was in the high dependency ward, and after that into the general ward. Wow. So that time onwards, I already stopped having all those dreams.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how we just go back to what has our training taught us before.
It was the default thing. I just think, no, all doctors are correct. Why didn't you question them? I was like, oops. Yeah, so that part onwards, I was kind of like fully lucid ready. And that's when the doctors, they will come in every day, to ask you questions like, what's your name? What's your IC number? Which is similar to a social security number. And you ask me, what's your date of birth? They want to check how conscious and lucid you are. So that time, obviously, I was already awake and I was very sassy. So I remember one of the doctors would always come in with a very bright smile and say, "Hey, good morning, Jasmine. How are you today? What is your name?" Then I will give him a death stare and say that, "You just called my name. How could you be asking me this question?" And I didn't bother to answer him, and I'll go back to sleep. That was how sassy I was, because I was sleeping happily. Because obviously, they are weaning me off the sedation and drugs and stuff like that. So, but I'm still feeling the effects of it. So I don't like to be disturbed when I was sleeping over there. And I would just, kind of like very curtly tell him off. And I remember there was once, they will ask you to like lift your hand, they want to check your response. Can you lift your left hand? Can you lift your right leg? Can you show me some response? Those kind of stuff. So the same doctor came in on one of the days. He said, "Oh, good morning, Jasmine. Can you show me your right hand? Can you show me your left hand?" I was like groggily waking up. I was thinking, who's this person disturbing my sleep? So I like, okay, raise my hand. Then I said, "Can you show me one finger? Can you show me two fingers?" Told him off. I said that, "Do you want the third finger?" And then he didn't even bother to reply. His smile just vanished and he walked out.
Exactly. Our brain builds shortcuts. Our brain builds these patterns that it just wants to kick over into, and will apply them when it can. So you come out of this experience, and it sounds like you go back to work, but ultimately you end up leaving the corporate world. Was that your choice?
That was my choice, and that was not an easy decision to make. I went back to work, but I couldn't perform up to my previous level, obviously. In the corporate world, as much as they try to be understanding and forgiving, but they still have to follow procedures and protocols. So if I'm not up to my mark, I have to be graded badly. I don't think the compassion aspect really comes in when people do appraisal, because if you are going to put yourself on a performance curve or a Gaussian curve, it will be pretty much obvious who is on the lower end. I mean, for this case, it would be me, because I can't perform back to that level that I used to. Although I was like really giving my all to the best I can. Then and obviously I was plagued with headaches and things like that, maybe probably due to the coping and the stress and all these things, because I actually nearly went into a very depressive state. I was like going home. I mean, I was okay at work. I look okay because I put up a very brave front. I say, yeah, I can handle it. I have that kind of portray that kind of image to them, probably, because I really wanted to reach back my previous level, but I just realized that I can't. Then I actually went into this very depressive state. I was actually staring blankly, into space. And I realized something was not right when there were episodes of me I just stare at something, not saying anything, not doing anything, and tears just roll down. So I realized that, hey, not a healthy state to be in. Fortunately, I realized that. Although at one point I was hoping that, the company would kind of like retrench me and give me 19 years worth of compensation, but unfortunately that didn't play out. So I mean, I discussed with my husband, so we were saying like, I mean, it's a cushy job. After the stroke, I don't have any more insurance benefits, of my own personal one. Very obviously, because it would probably, a lot of things would have been compromised. So my insurance benefits, all this would be in jeopardy. So I was in a cushy job with good benefits. But yet I made the decision that, hey, I don't think I should stay, even though if I have the benefits or the pay. I mean, it's after all a stable job that pays decent. I had to make that tough decision to get out of it, get my life sorted out in order, put things together, because I can't be like just going back and being so depressive. Something's really not right at that point of time. And not to mention all the headaches and things like that. So it's like when I have these bouts of headaches episode, I have to go on medical leave, to the point whereby unpaid leave, because the hospital visits and stuff like that really maxed out all the paid leaves. Yeah, so I had to bite the bullet. I discussed with my husband, then we say, okay, let's make some adjustments. We go with single income for the time being. And yeah, so I resigned after that, after 19 years. Yeah.
You end up opting to pursue the entrepreneurial route with everything from Blessing Freely to your book to Always Awake to all of these different projects. It's kind of amazing looking through all the different things that you're working on. So what is Blessing Freely?
Blessings Freely actually started out pretty interestingly. It started out as a Facebook page. I had a friend, his name is Larry. He was also going through some health crisis back then. He was kind of like very sad, and I was kind of like, we had a chat, and I was saying, hey, instead of, why not just make the best out of it. Life is short. We never know what happened, and he was going through some health crisis, so he probably had some things to sort out on his own. So I just suggested to him, why not we just post some positive stuff, and maybe that might help you feel better. So he agreed, and I created this page called Blessings Freely for him, and we were kind of co-managing it, posting inspirational quotes and things like that. That was a Facebook page. But after I had my own ordeal, so I took it one step further. Facebook pages, it was still mainly Larry doing it, and some other people who come in to help contribute, but it's not very in full swing. But it's an old page for several years already, and with a certain following. So I took Blessings Freely into a website. I decided to use my email marketing knowledge to write this ebook, give it out as a freebie, and see what I can get from email marketing. So that is the extension of what I did for Blessings Freely. But the email marketing part, I was hoping to use it to kind of fund the project of the website. But the main thing was I wanted to share my story and help to inspire people who are going through a tough part. So I wrote that book, 7 Effective Ways to Overcome Adversities, Surviving Stroke Like a Boss. So that was my lead magnet for Blessings Freely.
One of the things I really like about that is, aside from just the power of the message, is the idea of, okay, I want to learn how I can apply this other stuff, figure out what's going to work, and make sure I provide value while I'm learning and perfecting this stuff too.
Yes, and actually it's not so much about the monetary value. I get very thrilled when someone tells me that I resonated fully and this story came at the right time. These are the non-monetary, the intangible perks that I get from running that. So I really love to receive all these messages when they come in that say, your story picked me up today. It came at the right time. So I don't think this one is something that money can buy.
One of the things I really enjoy about doing this show is just the privilege it gives me of talking to so many amazing people around the world and sharing their stories.
But to be honest, I wasn't really doing much of the auto for Blessings Freely email recently because I was busier with the projects on Always Awake. And the interesting thing was one of the subscribers actually wrote me an email and said that, I haven't seen an email from you for some time. Are you okay? I was so touched. I was like, hey, people notice that I haven't been writing and they are actually waiting for my message. That kind of warms my heart too. And your story of what is Always Awake. Always Awake started off as I'm putting my tech skills to use because I set up Always Awake so that to differentiate myself from the usual freelancer who just takes your money and there's no traceability. But in other words, Always Awake was actually set up even while I was in corporate. But it was like a side hustle.
Sure.
After discussing with my husband that, I will take a break and things like that, that was when I took my side hustle into my main business now.
What sort of work are you doing through there today then?
Mainly I do quite similar to bespoke solutions. That means I do things like websites, including landing pages, including stores. So like that website aspect. The social media aspect, I can help people manage some of their social media content. I do a little bit of copywriting on the site. Probably due to my technical background, I'm able to read more technical articles and I can help someone to change that copy into more layman's term. This is a problem with especially if it's SMEs. They probably don't really have a content marketing department, maybe. The articles that they write probably is written by the engineers.
Right.
And only engineers can read an engineer's article. But the article is meant for the general public. You can't post the article and expect people to relate and buy your products. Or rather, that's what I feel. I kind of able to write a bit more technical or even financial articles into a content that educates. I can write articles about how VoIP works in a layman's term. So email marketing, that one is like a side gig. I don't know if you call that a side gig, but yeah, that's one thing. So Always Awake does all the other stuff like websites, social media management, a bit of copywriting, those kind of stuff. It's very similar to how you would expect a digital agency work. Like example, my oldest client with us was during my side hustle days. She's probably with us for about 8 years already. So it started out with helping her to do a website, then to a little bit of like social media, then a bit of like ads management. Because as they go on the ladder, it's a whole transformation process. So I would think Always Awake is not really a digital marketing agency. They are more like a digital transformation agency. So we kind of like work with our clients to help them in the different phases that they need.
Let's circle back now to where all of this started here, and talk about Clubhouse a little bit here. So how did you get involved in Clubhouse to begin with?
So in the beginning, it was more like, since I got on with all these workshop peers, mentors as well, it became more like a learning platform for me to see how I can, further refine my business or pick up new skills. And at that point of time, there were a lot of speakers and trainers on that platform. It wasn't that saturated yet. So everyone was getting up because all the big names were there and dropping value bombs, and there was no recording it. So I was there soaking up everything like a sponge. But a part of me wanted to find this group that I always wanted to look for, because after I was discharged and before everything starts to run its course, I wanted to actually look out for fellow survivors to see how we can kind of like support each other. But I didn't manage to do that project initiative. So when I was on Clubhouse, I was thinking, hey, maybe this might be a platform that I can try that initiative. I started to open empty rooms about health topics and things like that. But I guess I was opening it at the wrong timing, because I was opening it at like my 6 p.m., which is probably Eastern Standard Time, 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. And your time would be probably 3, 4 a.m. So obviously I wasn't getting the crowd I was looking for. So I was opening empty rooms. I get a few people here and there, and some of them managed to rejoin back this big main community. So I stumbled into Joe's room at some point, and when I heard the topic and the people there that were sharing, I knew this is the group that I was looking for. Immediately, I knew it.
And by Joe, you're referring to Joe Borges of the Neuro Nerds, who's been a guest on this show and runs and hosts and co-hosts the Neuro Nerds podcast.
Definitely great guy. And through him, I managed to link up with all you beautiful people. And when I found this group, I realized that, hey, I'm not too sure, is it because, during the recovery journey, I was so alone. So I kind of like really latched on to this feeling of the support community that I was looking for all the while. And I was very keen in like putting a space as well. And the room that Adrian and I runs is on one of the days, while Joe runs the other 2 rooms on the other 2 alternate days.
And what's great about Clubhouse is that anybody can just click on a button and pop into one of these rooms and listen to the conversation, or be invited up to participate in the conversation. And there are just thousands of different conversations you can join or observe. And it's a really nice tool for that. And I'm going to have links or the schedule for the different rooms that you run and that we see. We're going to have all that in the show notes as well. So it's definitely a platform to check out. And if you are comfortable participating, great. If you're not comfortable participating, that's great too.
What I love about Clubhouse is like what you mentioned. We don't have to prepare ourselves, comb our hair, doll up to be on a Zoom meeting session. It sounds more like a conference call setting. And it's like having a virtual conference call with anyone in the world. So it's very convenient. It's like just picking up the phone and dialing someone, and you can go into a 3-way, 4-way, and everyone can just either speak in sequence or join in a boisterous discussion.
And and it's amazing because you can go into some of these rooms and you'll hear everything from somebody who's had a victory in their recovery to somebody who is really struggling, and it's a great opportunity to just sort of share in the tremendous variety of experiences within our community. And then when you don't want to talk about brain injury, to just go into community discussing pretty much anything else in the world. Exactly.
There are many topics there. So those rooms that I believe Joe and I host, I believe we have a similar objective. We want to hold a safe space for people to come in to share. Those who needs a little, perk me up can come in and get some moral support, a listening ear, some advice.
And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about modus nova. One of the most important words in the stroke recovery world is, of course, repetition. It's repeating key movements again and again, thousands of times, that actually unlocks the power of neuroplasticity to reshape our brain so we can recover the use of an affected limb or hand or language or whatever. And Modus Nova helps stroke survivors get those repetitions in to get those limbs back, because it's all about the repetition. The Modus Hand is an AI-controlled, air-powered robotic exoskeleton that helps you move your hand through the exercises you do as you play video games. And as you try to move your hand, the sensors in the Modus Hand will detect that and will help you while you play those games. Because again, it's all about the repetition. Visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova to find out if Modus Nova is right for you. Use promo code STROKECAST for 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack of the week.
Celebrate every little victory, take baby steps. This is more like a mindset thought. Sometimes we tend to compare ourselves with our old self and saying, I could do this the last time, why I can't do this now? But sometimes we just have to take a little step back and look at the whole picture. Right, you probably could do this last time around, but after your stroke, you couldn't do this at all, but now you are doing it. So it's a step towards the right direction. We should celebrate every little victory with each baby step that you take. I would say it's more like a mindset thing that I keep myself. I mean, of course, there are days that are bad, but I just go back into that crying cycle again. After we are done crying, you kind of like dry off the tears and look, okay, what can I make better out of it? So it's a bit like when you climb a mountain, you just take one step at a time, and that's how you reach the mountain, the peak.
So after all of this, was your stroke a blessing or a curse?
As much as I would say and hope that it's a blessing, I would say that it's because it throws you in a different perspective as what without the stroke, I would never have seen before. It makes me relook into priorities in life, and it really kind of like forces me to slow down and appreciate things as they are. Previously, I would probably be, when you're in the rat race, you're really chasing for something that will always get further. Now, I have a pretty much, I wouldn't say muted expectation, but I would say that I am more appreciative of things in life now. So I would prefer to think of it as a blessing.
Well, Jazz, this has been that's so important, and this has been just so fantastic. I could keep talking to you for hours and hours, but thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Bill, it's my pleasure, and thank you for being so kind and accommodating to my last minute request. I really appreciate that too. It's nice to talk with you, and yes, I think we probably could just rattle on a bit more if not for the time.
Let's talk about sponsor Like-Minded. Like-Minded is a nonprofit membership program that helps you live your best post-stroke life. Like-Minded offers classes on everything from hand exercises to, how to tell your story. The virtual classes are led by survivors, by occupational therapists, by physical therapists, by doctors, and more. They're held throughout the week, but if you can't attend the one you want, it's okay, because members get access to the recorded version of the sessions as well, so you can still catch up. If you have a specific question, reach out through the private text messaging group that's part of the program. So ultimately, get the support that you need and deserve to live your best post-stroke life. To find out if Like-Minded is right for you, visit strokecast.com/likeminded. And use promo code STROKECAST to save 20% off your first month. Now, as I'm recording tonight's wrap-up, or this morning's wrap-up, or this afternoon's wrap-up, really, depending on where you happen to be living and listening to this and how you choose choose to demarcate the hours of your day. I do also want to mention that at this very moment, I happen to be a little bit irritable and quite a bit hungry. And you know what? That's okay. The reason for that, and this may certainly qualify as TMI, but, I think I'm well past that point in telling stroke stories, is that this past year, I turned 50. And once you turn 50, and really now they're saying 45, the doctors want to do a special photo shoot of you. In particular, that means it's time to get the colonoscopy done. Yeah, I'm doing that tomorrow. And yeah, that will be a thing. So what that means is that I haven't been able to eat any solid food for the last 24 hours to, help clean out the system. So I am running a bit hungry right now. I have done the first half of the special overnight medicine to prep for the process, the bowel prep kit. And let me tell you, that stuff works as advertised. And I'll leave it at that. So why am I even bothering to mention this? Well, because while we talk a lot about recognizing stroke and knowing your signs, balance, eyes, face, arms, speech, and time to call an ambulance, and the importance of also recognizing that there are different stroke symptoms in women who may also exhibit general weakness, disorientation and confusion, or memory problems, excess fatigue, or nausea and vomiting, as we specifically saw in Jasmine's story here. Unfortunately, we're not limited to just a single health condition in our life. And we are all potentially at risk of things like colon cancer and just all sorts of other screenings. Not an increased risk due to stroke, but just a risk because, we're still human. So that means doing what we have to do to promote early detection and early testing and just getting the stuff done that we need to get done so that if there is something wrong, we can catch it early and minimize any problems later on. Because when you've already got the disabilities related to stroke, you really don't want to pick up anymore. So check with your doctors, check with your medical teams. Don't just talk about stroke with them and stroke rehab and recovery. Make sure you're also getting all of your other medical screenings done so you can live your best life as long as you possibly can. So that's the big picture stuff. But in terms of some of the more specific stuff, this is going to be the second time in my life I have had sedation with propofol. The last time I had that was shortly after stroke, a couple of months after my stroke, when I went in for a TEE test, a transesophageal echocardiogram. And in that test, they knocked me out and put an ultrasound device down my throat and into my esophagus so they could look at my heart to evaluate my PFO, the opening between the right and left sides of the heart that about a quarter of the population has that can allow a blood clot to sneak through, which then causes all sorts of problems. You may recall a few months ago, I talked to Misha Montana, and her stroke was caused by a blood clot getting through her PFO. So they were examining my PFO by going through my throat with the ultrasound device. They ultimately concluded that my PFO was not the cause of my stroke. They did discover that my aorta is a little bit bigger than normal, so they want to keep an eye on that. So again, the important lesson is these tests can help you be aware of other things that you want to keep an eye on in the future. But the point of this is that with that test and with that exam and with that sedation, I felt no pain and felt no problems from going through that test. And I'll tell you that propofol nap, probably one of the best naps I've had in my life. It is one of those things where once I sort of faded into it, then I suddenly came out of it, and it turns out an hour had passed and the exam had been done and everything was all finished. It was just time to do the paperwork and finish recovering so I could get home safely. But anyway, so that's what my tomorrow is going to look like. Getting some sedation so they can do an exam and look for things. They just happen to be going in the opposite end this time. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk about with that. But getting back to the content of today's episode, I did mention in my introduction that Jasmine has a very understated approach to the way that she tells her story. It's all very matter of fact. And that's one of the things that is so fun about listening to her. And it's in the way she describes things. I mean, she describes the headache that came with her stroke, where, remember, she's had these aneurysms burst in her brain, and her brain is actively getting bled upon as blood is pumping through these arteries. And she describes it as it's getting a bit annoying, irritating, and a little bit unbearable. And there is something I just really enjoy about the phrase "a little bit unbearable," the sheer contrast there. When told about her dreams that indicate she was looking through the veil of death, Jazz's reaction is, "Oh, that's very interesting." Even as she tells the story of that fateful meeting where her stroke was really rearing up, she casually mentions the bucket swap that happened while the meeting was still going on. And all that makes Jazz just that much of a joy to speak with. So connect with Jazz if you can. Go ahead and jump into her Clubhouse rooms when you get the chance. I also continue to be just fascinated by the metaphorical poetry of the brain as it tries to make sense of the world while the brain itself is collapsing. I mean, a couple of years ago, I talked with Christine Lee about her book, Tell Me Everything You Don't Remember, where once she lost the word for eggs as she was experiencing her stroke, her brain was able to offer up things like shell bells as an alternative name for eggs. And if you want to listen to that episode, be sure to check out the show notes because I'm going to link to that in there as well. Now, I'm certainly no psychologist or dream interpretation expert, and yet I am fascinated by Jazz's dream of the red dragon. If I was going to write the story, using a red dragon as a metaphor for a bleed in the brain damaging the cells does seem about right. And Jazz runs through this video game collecting resources to heal and to fight off the dragon that seems to know that it ultimately can't survive unless Jazz survives too. Jazz never actually defeats that dragon. She ultimately had to live with it and let it fade into the background as her dreams transitioned into more mundane representations of real life. And I think we're all going to be glad that that red dragon did let Jazz survive and join Clubhouse after years of contending with her stroke aftermath without a survivor community around her. We talked about Clubhouse a fair amount in this interview, so I won't belabor the point here. I've already gone on long enough. But I will just say it is a platform that has expanded a lot over the past year. Anyone can join on an iPhone or Android device, and there are thousands of people using it at any given moment. Individual virtual rooms on Clubhouse will range from a couple people to a couple hundred people, and you can actively participate or just listen. Jazz's room is on Mondays at 6 p.m. Pacific time, which happens to be 9 p.m. Eastern time, or 10 a.m. Tuesdays in Singapore. There are usually, I'd say, 6 to 20 brain injury survivors in there, so pop on by and join the community. Or join the rooms that neuronerd Joe Borges runs at 6 p.m. Pacific on Wednesdays and Fridays. Or really any of the other rooms you happen to see on the app. Check out Jazz's ebook on her website and sign up for her emails to continue to stay in touch. All those links are going to be available in the show notes, in the app you're listening in, as well as at strokecast.com/jazz, Jaz. Share this episode with someone you know by giving them the link strokecast.com/jazz. Subscribe to the free monthly Strokecast newsletter by visiting the link strokecast.com/news. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.